Hello. In this video, we'll be talking about current liabilities, specifically short-term notes payable and the interest associated with those notes payable. Let's quickly go over the definition. A liability. A liability is the present obligation to transfer an economic benefit. The economic benefit can have been transpired from either a contract or from past behavior. So in short, a liability is a debt that a company owes to another institution. The classifications for liabilities are current liabilities or long-term liabilities. The current liabilities are obligations that are owed within a year, within 1 year from the balance sheet date, or within the firm's operating cycle, whichever is longer. And for purposes of this video, we're just going to say that the current liabilities are due within 1 year. And liabilities can be satisfied, which means they can be paid either with a current asset or typically cash or accounts receivable, or they can be satisfied by creating a different current liability. Let's discuss short-term notes payable. Short-term notes payable are temporary financing from the company receives from the bank, and there's a formal contract, a promissory note is signed. It has typically lower interest rates than long-term liabilities or long-term debt, I should say. And while a company has a short-term notes payable, they can go out and look for financial alternatives. So what are those financial alternatives that we're going to be talking about? Instead of having a short-term note payable, a formal agreement with a bank that functions as a loan, there are other types of financials alternatives available, such as credit line, secured and unsecured loans, and commercial paper. And we'll be going through those in the next few slides. Before we start talking about all these different types of liabilities, let's just quickly go over interest. Interest is the cost of borrowing money. A bank is not going to lend a corporation money for free. Think about that. If a bank would just give you money that you could pay back at a future date without having to pay any sort of interest on it, then everybody would be borrowing money from a bank. So interest is the cost of the borrowing money. And when a company issues a notes payable or receives money from the bank or another institution, they have certain terms and which states the percentage that needs to be applied to the face amount of the loan. It'll also have the maturity date when the loan needs to be paid back. But for purposes of calculating the amount of interest on a note payable, you're going to take the face amount times the rate that's stated, and usually that's an annual rate, and times time to maturity. And we'll be going through some examples, so you'll see what that means in a few slides. So one of the financing alternatives that we saw is a credit line. A credit line or a line of credit is an agreement to provide short-term financing with amounts withdrawn by the borrower only when needed. So that's really when you have a notes payable, it's taking out a loan with a bank, and you get the cash, and you have to pay interest on within a certain time. A line of credit means the money is available to you for a company to borrow against, but only when they need it, and they don't necessarily even need to borrow against it. It's just there if they choose to use it. There are two different types of credit lines, the committed and the non-committed. The committed is backed by an actual formal agreement it's a legally binding agreement for the bank or the institution to provide the funds up to an agreed amount limit, as long as the borrower, the company meets the terms of the agreement. And the company will also have to pay typically a commitment fee to the bank to keep the credit line amount available to the company. So this is a fee that the corporation pays to the bank just to have this credit line. Whether or not they use it during the year, they still have to pay that fee. An example of a committed credit line would be a revolving credit facility where the bank commits to lend $10 million for 1 year to a company. A non-committed line of credit does not have any sort of agreement in place, so it's an informal agreement by not having an agreement, and it's a predetermined amount that the company can borrow against the line of credit without any sort of formal loan procedures. However, it's not guaranteed, so the bank does have the right to refuse to lend that money if the company needs it when it asks for it or decides to use it. An example of a non-committed would be an overdraft facility where the bank can decide whether or not to honor that draw. In both instances, committed and non-committed lines of credit, the borrower, meaning the bank, probably will require the company to maintain some sort of minimum balance in the bank as collateral. Let's quickly look at a disclosure of credit lines from IBM from 2022, and it's in their notes to their financials under borrowings, and it talks about lines of credit and says on June 30th, 2022, the company amended its existing $2.5 billion 3-year credit agreement and $7.5 billion 5-year credit agreement to extend the maturity dates to June 20th, 2025 and June 22nd, 2027, respectively. And it goes on to say the credit agreement permit the company and its subsidiary borrowers to borrow up to $10 billion on a revolving basis. And then the total expense recorded by the company related to these agreements was $11 million, $12 million, and $12 million for the past 3 years. And as of the year end December 31st, there were no material borrowings by the company under these credit agreements, credit facilities. So this $11 million and $12 million, that's the commitment fee that IBM had to pay in order to have a $10 billion line of credit available to them. Let's go through an example. On May 1, Affiliated Technologies, a consumer electronics firm, borrowed $700,000 cash from First Bancorp under a non-committed short-term line of credit arrangement and issued a 6-month 12% promissory note. Interest was payable at maturity. So issued May 1st. So on May 1st, we being Affiliated Technologies, received cash for $700,000 and recorded a notes payable for $700,000. On November 1, that's when the notes matured and we have to pay back that $700,000. So we're going to debit notes payable $700,000. However, there's an interest component to this note because no bank issues gives you money for free, and it's 6 months, 12%. And the way you calculate the interest is you take the face value, 700,000, times 12%, which is the annual rate. However, this note was only for 6 months out of the 12 months of the year. So you times it by 6 out of 12, or half. And that will give you 42,000. And so on November 1st, the company records interest expense, 42,000. They debit interest expense, they debit the notes payable. So the total cash outlay is going to be $742,000. Next, let's talk about what's called a non-interest bearing note. And just by the name, it seems like no interest is being paid, but that is not true, because always remember, no one is going to lend you money for free, or a corporation money for free. So let's look at this example. On May 1, Affiliate Technologies, a consumer electronics firm, bought inventory worth $650,000 by issuing a $700,000 non-interest-bearing note due in 6 months. So they said, okay, we need inventory for $650,000. We do not have, $650,000 today. So let's issue a notes payable. I will give you Affiliate Technologies will give its supplier $700,000 in 6 months, which means that there's a $42,000 what's called a discount on notes payable. And really, this is the interest that the company essentially is going to be paying to its supplier. So, but the notes payable is always recorded at the face amount, which was the 700,000, and then you have a discount on notes payable for the 42,000, and we know that the company received inventory for $658,000. 6 months later, when that notes payable is due, we will debit notes payable for $700,000 and credit cash for $700,000. We give our supplier $700,000 cash, and we will also record interest expense of $42,000, and now we will credit this discount notes payable, so it's off our balance sheet because we debited that account on May 1st, and now we're going to credit that account on 6 months later, so we have a zero balance in that account. Now look what happened. Affiliate Technologies essentially had a cash outlay of $700,000 for receiving $650,000 of inventory versus the notes issued when you get cash for a note. They received cash for $700,000 on May, but then they had to pay out $742,000 6 months later. So it's a bigger cash outlay for the interest-bearing note and non-interest-bearing note. The cash outlay is just for the face amount, but the asset that they received is less than that amount, less than the face amount. For the non-interest-bearing note that we just discussed, it would be described as being discounted at issuance at a 12% discount rate, right? So that $42,000 was calculated using a 12% discount rate on a $700,000 note. The way we calculate that 12% is we took the $700,000 times 12% times 6/12. However, we only received assets worth $658,000, which means that the company is essentially paying more than 12% to borrow that money. And this is it causes this effective interest rate to occur. And the way we calculate the effective interest rate is you take the total amount of interest that is actually paid for this, that is essentially paid for in the 6 month via getting $42,000 less of assets on May 1st for this example. So you take the $42,000 of interest divided by the actual amount that is borrowed or that is provided to the corporation. And that gives you 6.38% for 6 months. And so when you annualize it, it's a 12.76% effective interest rate. So we essentially paid $42,000 to get $658,000, and that makes it a 12.76% interest rate versus the note issued for cash. We received $700,000 using the 12% interest rate. So that's why the effective interest rate is higher in a non-interest bearing note when you receive the asset they received is less than the face amount of the note. So continuing on with the different financial alternatives, we talked about credit lines, And so we're going to talk about these other three items, the secured and unsecured loans and commercial paper. Secured loans are loans that are made by typically a bank, and they use some sort of collateral from the corporation as for those loans. So should the corporation default on those loans, then the bank has the right to go after the collateral that the company placed for those loans. And with corporations, they many times, as collateral for a loan, they will put accounts receivable as their collateral. There's two different ways they can do that. It's by pledging or factoring. When a corporation pledges their accounts receivable as collateral, it's just that means that the accounts receivable is there. Should the corporation default on the loan, then the bank can go after those accounts receivable and start collecting on those accounts receivable and keeping the cash that they collect. When a company will factor receivables, they actually are going to sell those receivables outright to the finance companies. And so the finance company will always try to go after those accounts to collect those accounts receivables. Unsecured loan means that there is no collateral put up backing up the loan. Well, one type of unsecured loan is called commercial paper, and commercial paper are issued to usually to meet the immediate financing needs of a corporation. These notes or liabilities are unsecured, and they're sold in minimum denominations of 25,000, and they do not mature beyond 270 days. They are extremely short-term kind of notes. The note is typically issued at a discount, and then the investor earns the difference between the discounted rate and the face value of the note at maturity. And these types of notes are backed by a line of credit that the corporation will have with their bank. So the corporation will sell this commercial paper to institutional investors and at a lower rate than they would get a bank loan for. So the institutional investors get the money from the corporation, and the corporation has to pay them a lower interest rate than they would if they borrow the money from a bank. And the institutional investors do this because the loan is actually backed by a line of credit. So they know that the company will always have the money to pay them back. Let's do a concept check for the interest calculation. Jamal borrowed $100,000 on July 1, 2027 and signed a one-year note-bearing interest at 8%. Interest is payable in full at maturity on June 30th, 2028. Jamal should report interest expense at December 31st for how much? So let's just look at a timeline here. And this is 7/1/27. And the note matures at 6/30/2028, right? And now here is December, year end, December 31, 2027. We need to accrue interest, but the question is, how much interest should they report? Well, we're going to take the face value of the note, which is $100,000, times the interest rate, the annual interest rate of 8%, times, this is just for 6 months out of the year, right? Six out of the 12 months, which equals $4,000. So they would accrue interest for $4,000.